Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. Welcome to this TELCoP for the middle of the year. I've been telling people all morning that it's very cold here on the Gold Coast sorry, in Brisbane. And they've all been laughing at me. I'm talking to colleagues in Sydney and in Melbourne and they go, cold, or Canberra, in the negatives. But it's a cold, definitely a cold winter morning, I think, regardless of where you are on the East Coast.
Absolutely.
Uh, yeah, that's it. So this is our mid-year sort of TELCoP meeting, ladies and gentlemen, and it as is becoming a bit of a tradition, I think, for the TELCoP, we tend to do a mid-year with a sort of a boot camp / workshop with one of our uh, champions, which is Darryl Clare. And so you can see that on the slide there. What Darryl's going to talk to you about today is a little bit about using AI for academic research. And interestingly, I've been talking about this a bit because I think people have moved on. They're still thinking about AI for learning and teaching, but I think people are starting to think about AI for research. And I talked to the RHD students, RHD supervisors last week about it. I've been talking to RHD students about it as well. And I think unlike learning and teaching where it's all panic mode, I think with research, there really is an opportunity for us to think about how we can use this tool in an ethical way. And then by extension, think about how this tool might be used by our students, our RHD students, as well as our undergrad and our master's students as well. And so that's what Darryl's going to kind of walk us through and tell us a little bit about. But I'm going to do what I usually do, and I'm going to do the very, very quick TELCoP introduction. I'll see if I can get through it as quick as we can. So the first thing is, as always, going to acknowledge that traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on. As I always say when we get on this slide, that's across all of Australia, as I mentioned, maybe mainly the East Coast. Here in Brisbane, that's the Jagera and the Turrbal people. And I'd like to acknowledge those elders and pay my respects to the past, present, and emerging elders. Here's all of the blah blah about the TELCoP. If you're here, then you know most of this already, so I'm not going to labor this at all, but just tells you a little bit about what our technology enhanced learning community of practice does. And as always, I'll mention that all of the TELCoP recordings are on YouTube, with the exception of a couple that we did earlier this year with Robert and I, which are unlisted on YouTube. So if you want access to them, send me or Robert an email and we can give you the link. But we just thought with those ones which were a little bit more hot topics, we might just leave them unpublic, but they're available if you want them. But this one with Darryl here will probably be public unless Darryl tells me not to.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so who's talking to you again? Most of the people here know us already, so this is me. I definitely need to update my photo. My wife tells me she hates that photo. I think it's time for me to replace it, right? But this is me. I'm Michael Cowling, Associate Professor of ICT here at CQU. Second champion who you might get an opportunity to talk to during the session is Robert Vanderburg. He's a senior lecturer in education, also at CQU as well. But the man of the hour is Darryl Clare. And Darryl Clare is our is the other champion of the TELCoP, but as I always describe Darryl Clare, and I think Robert would say this as well, he's very much a hands-on kind of do it kind of guy, right? And that's what we love about Darryl is he's always thinking about, well, how could we do that? Here's an idea, how could we do it? It's reflected in the stuff that he does day on day, like for instance, all the work that he does with the Scouts and first aid and those kinds of things. And I think also reflected in the fact that he is a long time or relatively long time Order of Australia medal winner as well. So Darryl, as I said, is going to talk to us a little bit today about AI and research and how those things go together. I have put on here on a link on the right hand side to Darryl's website, which is very easy to find. It is Darryl Clare with 2 R's .com.au, and you can find various different things that Darryl is doing. Keep an eye on that website; it changes all the time depending on what Darryl's up to, right? And so you go there next week and it'll be entirely different. But it has some good links there, including with Darryl with a skeleton doing VR. And then I usually try and include a silly photo of somebody. I have lots of silly photos of Darryl, but I thought I'd include this one, which is not quite so silly, which is that a few years ago the university spotlighted Darryl as a paramedic science lecturer here, which is his nominal role. But really, as it says on there, a worker that works tirelessly with innovative tech and with the community, and that's I think why he's admired so much around the traps. So that was Michael's very, very quick introduction. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I am going to give Darryl control. If you could give us a few minutes at the end just to wrap things up, Darryl, that'd be awesome.
Yeah,
But apart from that,
I
I will.
learned that I'm going to be a bit slower. Plus, I am a bit slower today. I finally managed to catch COVID a month ago
Oh
after,
no.
and there are just some days I just have no energy. But anyway, today's one of those. But that's okay.
Well, I mean, Robert also caught COVID, so I'm starting to worry now that I'm the only that hasn't. I'll hand it over to you anyway, Darryl. I've stopped sharing the screen, so the stage is yours.
No problem. I guess I'm going to eventually just share this window so we don't have the big screen. But I thought I'd talk about my interest in research and why I'm looking at it. I've come down to 4 things that I do: the VR, the mobile learning, my mobile learning apps, escape rooms, but one of the big ones that I'm working on right at the moment, and it's about to launch a website called the Open Source Medical Simulation Network. And this here is basically the concept behind it is I'm 3D printing all these different wound trainers, and the concept is that we can have them in countries that can't afford high-end wound trainers. So it's actually fairly simple stuff to do and fairly cheap. So I guess that's one of the things that I do at the moment, which is really interesting me. And I'm just in the process, one more subject, and I've finished my master's, a paramedic practitioner. And then I hope to go on to a PhD. So I'm going to stop sharing now and share this main screen so we just have it a little better. Yeah. Did that share okay, Michael?
It's still thinking about it.
Okay.
If on my screen, it
Oh,
says
was it?
Darryl has started screen sharing.
Yeah. You mightn't like sharing just a window. If necessary, I'll share a whole screen again. I'll move some things around though.
I don't know. Has it come up for you, Robert, or is it still say started screen sharing?
I'll try the whole window again,
Yeah,
hey?
maybe.
It's not coming up for me yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
It got a bit stuck. You jinxed it. Oh, there you go. We got the whole window, Darryl, now. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
perfect.
up. I can see you doing it.
Perfect. I'm not going to go through lots of tools, but I'm going to go through some that I think are just amazing. And from a student's perspective, what they can do. And I've been struggling with the ethical side of things. If it helps us do a literature review, is that unethical? I don't know. But let's go first to the really unethical end of the scale. A couple of the programs that are out now, Jenny AI, actually just writes your whole paper for you. Students are using this type of thing now. Stealth GPT allegedly will write a document and it's undetectable to being an AI. So I haven't bothered with those. I've played with them and they seem to work really well, but I think, nah. What is more interesting is something like PaperPal. PaperPal is a thing that we can use to create a document, and whatever we're going to create. We can do things like brainstorm ideas, ask a research question, all of that. So you'll see today I'm going to ask a few research questions. I've copied them over here. So the question I'm going to pose to it is, what's the current research on compression-only CPR compared to traditional CPR with breaths and everything? So it'll go look at some literature, bring back what it thinks. So sometimes it doesn't always bring back everything you want, but The other side of this is templates. With templates, you can use it to, you want to do a research article, start writing, choose a section. I want an introduction. Generate the introduction. Field of study, medicine. Brief description of your study. Try and spell right even, hey? Minimum of 10 words. Okay. So I wasn't going to dwell too much on it, but it is one that a student can actually go through and put everything together in a paper fairly easily. What I think is more interesting now is we get onto some of these newer tools. This one here is quite amazing. I'm not sure if people have seen Consensus. Consensus is a tool that lets you ask a research question. So going is, what's the current research on compression-only CPR compared to traditional CPR with compressions and breaths? I hit the button. It uses Copilot to write a summary, gives us the links to the papers, gives us a conclusion. We can have a look at all the papers that it's suggested, and then we can filter it in as well to what we want. There's a few that I really love for looking at research papers. Probably the one that I think is the best of all is Elicit. Elicit, and you can see how a student could find this really handy. So I'm asking for the current research. Gives me info about the top 8 papers. But then I've got the option to do some filters. So I only want stuff. So let's go 2019. So we've got our paper, we've got our summary. We can then add things like what the main findings were, the methodology, the outcomes measured. We can also put our own in, so out of hospital survival. And it will do its best to actually come up with any papers that mention that. Create the column, sorry. Yeah, so it's read the papers and can tell us what the outcomes for survival was. So you can see how a tool like that would be very handy to do a literature review, to get your literature. And students are really aware of these sort of things. There are even better ones. Again, one that I've played with recently is SciSpace. And SciSpace is a great little one again. It's got a few more interesting filters. So if we actually do the same thing, we can either paraphrase, extract data. So we're just going to do, again, what's the current research? We can then filter this for top tier papers. We can add columns. So what we want, we can create a column again. And it will read those papers and look for what the survival rates are, if there's information in there. Have people seen these before? Some of these? No, they're really, really great for doing literature, getting your literature to support your arguments and things like that. Some of these also have GPTs you can use, and I'll show you some of those in a minute, what we can do with that. Another one is Perplexity. It tends to be a wider search than just literature. It'll also go into websites, articles, other things, but you can get a reasonable amount of information out of it. Another one that everyone is starting to talk about, and they say it's actually faster than ChatGPT, is Claude from Anthropic. Claude is the sort of rival of ChatGPT. So we can add our question in there again and start our chat. Again, I don't find it as useful as, say, ChatGPT, especially when we use GPTs. So with GPTs are little things people have written that actually, image generators, DALL-E for pictures. One that I find really good, the data analyst. We start a chat with that. We actually put our question in there again. Because it's a GPT specifically designed for research, it hones nicely in on research. Where data analysts is mind-boggling, I'm going to upload 2 documents here. I've got a data set of data, and I've got the information about the data set. Then we're going to ask it to tell us what it's found in there. Then we can do things like, I'm asking it to suggest a comprehensive series of hypotheses that could be run on this data set in the format of the hypothesis name, the HOH1, the variables used, and the statistical tests. So it will go through and tell us what statistical tests to do on this data. Right. We can then ask it to, can you write a results section based on the above? I've just finished my master's research project. It was quite frustrating to run it through this afterwards and find that I made some mistakes, but I was happy to leave it. But what was really interesting for me was I actually got ChatGPT to teach me how to use SPSS because I was really struggling. So I went into the data analysts and got it to actually help me learn how to do all my tests in SPSS. So that's quite mind-boggling, isn't it? What we can pull out of data here. Yes.
So one, these ran t-tests, which are pretty easy to do. Excel can run a t-test, so it probably just t-tests on there. But you would have to write up in your write-up if you ran your ANOVAs in ChatGPT opposed to running it in SPSS.
Yeah. It's a good way to just crunch some data. The data analyst will also can you please do a set of charts and tables?
One of the questions was, because I'm a statistician, are the results accurate? One of the dilemmas is I'm not a statistician. I'm an applied statistics person.
Absolutely.
Dr. Marcolades is a friend of mine who's a statistician. He's the editor of the Structural Equation Modeling Journal. And what he would tell you is SPSS is spurious for multivariate analysis. He would say if you don't use SAS, it's not accurate.
Yeah.
If you use SPSS, it's inaccurate, right? So one of the dilemmas is when it comes to this finishing your dissertation versus getting your dissertation published, right? If you just say you ran it in ChatGPT or something like that, someone's going to ask you to rerun it and demonstrate that it's accurate by running it in SPSS and in with t-scores, but I'm just answering the questions, are the results accurate? It's more that in the modern era, like when I did my dissertation, I had to run my stats in SAS and in SPSS.
Yeah.
To ensure they were accurate. And so I don't think this is any different in that you should be checking things in more than one source.
Yeah. And I think that's where the benefit of it is. And they keep coming out with more and more GPTs that can do some really interesting things. Now, I will show you, you can actually write your own GPTs. So in my own GPTs, I've got a vet assessment plan creator. So I can actually go over to here, just gonna and I've trained the model to have basically work off a training.gov URL. So I'm going to say, can you please write a assessment plan, workbook and questions, and give model answers. And can you display a mapping matrix? So yeah, so we've, that's pretty simple what we've asked it to do. So if we send that out, I've shown what a template should be. So it's now coming up with what it feels the assessment items are. And then also a set of questions and the model answers for each of those. So scenario assessments, what needs to be involved in those scenario assessments. From a vet perspective, it's really quite useful to actually rough out some work.
Darryl, Loretta wants to know, can you put a specific unit in there?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I will share these into the chat. So I've made 3 or 4 different ones myself. I've got a third-party report generator that will actually create a third-party report from a unit. I'll open these up in different areas so we can look at them. So for the third-party report, all we're going to need is the URL for the unit. So we just go to training.gov and get that. Can you generate a third-party report and also a mapping matrix for the unit? And we're all I've matrix, I can't spell today. And you just simply change the URL to what you're looking for.
How much time does it take to create your own chat GPT?
Not long at all. It's actually scary how quick they go. I'll show you in a minute how we can make one. Again, would you rely 100% on it? Probably not, but it gives you a really great starting point to actually create these. And you can see how we've mapped it across, and that in itself is really handy. We know that we've mapped it. Vet, because it is very prescriptive, it works well that way. Professional conversation generator. A vet uses professional conversations to check knowledge, and they always should have a set of model answers. So basically the training behind this is simply just to that. I created a simple one for scouts too. So can you please a risk assessment for 14 to 18-year-olds hiking through Brisbane Forest Park. So I've asked it in that when I put the chat together, I said I wanted to have, apart from the risks, I wanted the mitigation strategies and everything like that. And you can go and keep learning or changing the model as we go. So it's actually then created as a reasonably nice risk assessment that we can use. That was, and this has been done wholly and solely for people doing outdoor work, but you could see how you could do a risk assessment for other things. So actually, let's have a look at how we do that. So we create a GBT. So once we go in, we ask the risk assessment. In a science lab, hey?
Hi, Darryl. Sorry, I just missed how you reach at this window because I can see explore chat, explore GPTs,
Yep.
but I couldn't find create.
Are you on a computer or an iPad?
A computer.
Computer. It should be up there.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
I found that it doesn't work on those devices. So, okay, now it'll ask some more questions. Lab safety advisor. Sounds good.
Darryl is asking me to go for plus before we can create one. Get plus, is that okay?
Yeah, the only thing is plus will have a cost to it.
Yeah, you have to pay. You can't make them if you haven't paid for it.
Yeah, that's the annoying part.
Okay, so you've got the subscription to it. Okay.
Yeah.
So what's
I think
so,
ChatGPT is one of the things that I do subscribe to because I find it is really useful. Advised avoided in the lab. So I'm going to say all general risks in a lab setting. Can you also prompt people for risks they may not have noted? So send that in. It'll update the GPT. Oh, friendly, I think is good. So that GPT is ready now. I can actually test it. So can you please create a risk assessment and also mitigation strategies for a science lab for first year undergraduate students. Because we've given it the context, it'll go through and write that for us.
Daryl, sorry, even for the paid version, I've got subscribed version of ChatGPT. But I don't see that create button anymore, like
All
anywhere.
right, well, let's have a look. We'll go back. And when you create it, is it going into the store for selling? No. Anyone with the link is what I do. So, view ChatGPT. So what we can do here is if we go back to general ChatGPT, what you should have is explore GPTs up here.
Yep.
You got that? When you hit
Yep.
explore GPTs, you've got what's there, but then you've got my GPTs and create. Have you got that?
Now I just see create, but not my GPTs.
That's all right because you haven't got any made yet. That'd be why. So just hit create and it should take you into where you created.
Yeah, so get plus and
Yep. And there are some amazing GPTs already created for doing all sorts of things. Voice generator, text to speech. Consensus that I showed you before has its own GPT. We can actually, put a research question in here. We'll just put my research question in. Although if I'm going to do that, I tend to go back to consensus itself. Great that it gives you the links to the papers, so you can check that the papers are real, which in normal ChatGPT you can have some issues, but when the consensus plugin, it's working.
So I'd be interested, Darryl. I'm watching you do this, and it's always, as you said, it's what, jaw dropping, I think is the way you describe it. If you were to ask, and you can ask here or whichever one, something that's really a bad research question or
Yeah.
a generic prompt,
Yeah,
what does it do?
sure.
Because I'm trying to put myself in the seat of a student, right? Like a research student who's only just started, who might sort of say, "Well, my research question is, what is digital literacy?" or something like,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something really generic. I don't
Well,
know.
here's a better example. Type in, find a way to ask about, learning theories in education.
Yeah, you could do learning theories in education.
Constructed. So interesting. So here's what I would argue, right? So these are mentioning in big learning theories, convectivism. I'm a developmental psychologist, right? So connectivism, all these constructivism, humanism, behaviorism. Now, when somebody talks about their own, like I'm a visual learner or I'm an auditory learner, because what's going to happen, and this is something, Michael, I was talking about to kind of come in at the end of this and talk about, these devices are only going to be in the future beneficial for people that already are in the know.
Absolutely.
Right. And so what happens is it's going to create a larger gap because it's going to support anything that's wrong as much as it's going to support something that's right. So
Yeah.
just to point out a developmental psychologist thing with a quick evidence to prove my point. So nobody is a visual learner over an auditory learner. They don't exist. Why? Because there's no way to separate when are you hearing versus seeing. When you see, we can't get rid of seeing and you only hear. We can't get rid of hearing and only seeing. Now, are there certain things you prefer more or you like more? Yes, but you're not a visual learner. But if you type this in and you put in visual learners, it's going to support it and say it's real because there are articles out there saying it's real, even though it's not real. In the psychology world, we know they're not real because we know there's no way to fragment it out, right? There's no way to fragment how you learn seeing but not hearing, how you learn hearing but not seeing. So all the learning theories that are minutia theories, not behaviorism and cognitivism, but how we all personally think we learn, they're sort of not real, but they've garnered internet reality. Well, if you have a disability, right, you don't have you have a sight disability, then you can't see, but you're still, and they'll tell you if you work with people, they still see things in their head, but they don't see it, which is why when those people get sight, there's been research where people that were blind before, then they get sight, they can't see things properly. They can't see the difference between a picture and a real thing because they saw in their mind, so they still see, right? We're using the term see literally, and we're arguing the wrong part on whether or not learning theories is real or not, right? And that's what ChatGPT will let you do. It will let you get caught in the wrong part of it. All of these things will. And like Darryl's ability to generate a paper, like when I watched the first results section that was produced, right? Those are the same results you would find in any textbook that teaches you how to write the results or anything like that. And in reality, you will have to have written a bunch of results to know why those results aren't good results and where and how you would need to beef those results up. If you don't know, you're just going to give to whoever you think is the consumer, right? Either a professor or a friend or a journal or whatever is a consumer of the information, that write-up, and that won't be good enough. And then you won't know why, right? Because it'll just be that it's not. No. And one of the underpinnings, like, when these ChatGPT summarize articles, one of the dilemmas, I had this with a peer, right? He had read an article where he was trying to explain pedagogical content knowledge to me. And he read one article on it and he was wrong, right? And one reason that happens is when you're an expert in a field, you've read a lot of different papers and and the whole development of a construct, right? So there's content knowledge, there's pedagogy knowledge, and then there's this middle place called pedagogical content knowledge. And that's, oh, when I know enough about this content, I know that there's certain struggles students will have, and I need to adapt for that in my pedagogy. Now, if you don't know the content, you can't know that there's certain things, right? So the example I tell everybody of pedagogical content knowledge is if you teach math, you know kids, when the math gets harder, more complex, they will always forget to reduce fractions.
Yeah.
And because it becomes an outlier of thought that gets lost in the complexity of the different question. And so you start to learn that when they're mastering the complexity, they'll remember to simplify the fractions. It's not that they don't know how to simplify. You know they know how. You've already taught it. But you know the complexity of the question you're asking makes simplifying be an outer part of it. And that's a pedagogical content, right? Yeah. And so all these things, and that's what I wanted to talk about. What's going to happen is ChatGPT is not going to make the kid who we will have in 5 years actually better, right? Because they're going to come in and they're going to need to, at some point, write papers, write these things, interact with these things to learn how to produce something that's better, different. And then once they know what they're producing, they'll be able, you can take ChatGPT and do amazing things with it.
Yeah, I'd agree. You really need the underpinning knowledge of what you're doing to make it useful. And certainly that's where I found some of these. If I'm looking for a specific bit of research to support or not support an argument, I can actually ask the question quite well and find the most current research in that area. So yeah, but you are right. And I think what we'll find is those first programs I showed you where kids can get it to write the whole thing, because they don't understand the context, they won't use them that well. They
yeah. And one of the things like I've seen in my units and in many units is people worry about if they're using ChatGPT to produce a paper and not just looking if the paper is right or wrong.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually matter if they use ChatGPT. If they produce a failing paper that's wrong,
yeah,
it's still wrong. You don't have to find the ChatGPT in it, because the question you have to ask yourself is it better to write a wrong paper where you wrote it yourself and you get a failing grade, or you wrote a wrong paper in ChatGPT and you get a failing grade? At what? Yeah. And that nuance is going to get hard, right? Because I do think one of the things I've observed that is the new dilemma is how many tiers you are above the students you're teaching. And that's where I think ChatGPT is finding its niche and its problem.
Yeah.
Because like, as an example, in my previous teaching institutions, I have to have a PhD and had advanced classes in the content I teach. When I moved to this institution, they asked me to teach Australian geography to my students. It was the first unit they had me teach. I was like behind most of the students in the class.
Yeah.
Right? So I couldn't be ahead of students in understanding the content, right? I was like reading to keep up with them and stay ahead. And that's where it becomes harder, right? With interacting with these devices, is how much further above the students are you with the level of teaching interaction based on the unit you're teaching?
Yes. Absolutely. Would 100% agree with you on that. I think, you know, people are worried about it, but I don't think we're going to see causing that much issue, because you are right. Unless you have the knowledge of what you're doing, you're not going to write something that's that good.
Yeah, that's it. Knowledge of what you're doing and the ability to evaluate the output is the other part to me. And I think we all do that. And that's where I was going when I asked you the question, Darryl. I was like, if you type a crappy prompt, what do you get? And the answer is you get a slightly crappier result.
Yeah.
Right. So it's about I watched you craft those prompts, and I thought, how would a student know to ask for a mapping matrix or a? And I thought to myself, this is the stuff that our students don't know how to do, and which is why I think we need to be less worried about the students using these tools. And then the other bit is when you read the output and you just immediately and almost subconsciously go, no, that's wrong, and you fix it. But the student doesn't have the ability to do that because they don't know what's wrong. But I mean, having said all of that, I think the middle bit is really interesting. And tell me just, I mean, to wind us up, Darryl, I mean, in your experience, you didn't write your master's using this, right? Or if you did, you just used it for the black box in the middle, right?
Well, where I would use it in my master's was just finding, I wanting to find a very specific bit of research. And I used mainly consensus. I found the best, although I'm starting to think that SciSpace is probably even a little better. So yeah.
How do you find the lit review? Because they were fascinating, by the way, just as an aside. Those couple of first ones that you showed that generate the table with the methodology and the results. I mean, that's one of the first things I often ask my RHD students to do. And
absolutely.
They seem pretty good. I mean, I'd have to read through them, but it feels like it's something it wouldn't do a bad job at doing, sort of plucking out the methodology, plucking out the results.
I've been starting to do some lit reviews on my 3D printing to find out what's really happening in that space in medical simulation. Yeah.
Brenda wants to know if you tried Rabbit.
Rabbit, I've used it. Yeah. Rabbit will go like paper to paper. And there's connected papers and a few others that work really well as well. So connected papers is one I've used, which is like Rabbit, but you can drill in, like if you find a great paper, then you have a look at who's referenced it, who's been using that. You might find some more new research. I think big thing of all this, and I unfortunately missed Paul's presentation last week, but I think if I'm right, Paul, was more about the prompt is the really important thing. Prompt engineering now and actually working out the prompts you need is the way to go.
Give us a minute on prompt engineering, Paul. We've got a minute if you want to tell us a little bit about, and point us towards the recording of your presentation. You can do a plug while you're there.
Excellent. So the nice way to do this is to log into the CQUni and have a look there. There's a whole range of different resources there, and trying to segment that down by discipline as well at the moment as to what can be used. There's also the StaffNet pages, and I'll try and drop these into StaffNet, the learning and generative AI in learning and teaching. And there's actually a process by going through the prompt. I think it was race, it was one of them. So we talk about that. It's talking about putting it into giving the Gen AI some context around what you want it to do, what the role is that you're looking for, just exactly how Darryl's done. So one of the ones that I've just come up with for doing rubrics, creating rubrics, and I'll just drop that into the chat for you so that you can see.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So this one should save academics around about 6 hours of development time. Now it's not going to get it to perfect every time. And it depends on what Gen AI agent you're using. And admittedly, I've been using ChatGPT a lot. That's been my go-to at the moment. Colbert for the research stuff has used Research Rabbit as well and has hooked it up to his Zotero library. So now he can use the generative AI to query his Zotero library and come up with a quote. Who said something about what, is the sort of thing that he can put in there, and it will come back with the paper that it was mentioned in. So, yeah.
For people that are watching the recording, the prompt that Paul just pasted in the chat basically says act as a professor of learning and teaching. So it gives it a role, developing a rubric at an AQF level, lists what the grades are, asks it what it's going to do in terms of the assessment criteria, says you should list it vertically and have a separate row for assessment, and then give some detail about assessment information. So you can see, as Paul said, the idea is there that you're breaking down what you want it to do, and you're giving it some context, you're giving it some measures, you're giving it some criteria and some formatting. And I think that's essentially what you're saying. If you can construct the prompt in a detailed way. And my flip side to that, ladies and gentlemen, would be if you're worried about your undergrads and your postgrads, just be confident that at least at the beginning, they probably don't have the ability to do that. And the students that are using this tool.
What I think people are missing, when they say, oh, they're paying people, like with this metaphorical, I've never heard anybody actually get the job, but they're paying people hundreds of thousands to be, prompt generators. The reality is you have to have the content and interactive knowledge in the field that you're in to be a good prompt generator for that field, right? So somebody who prompt generates like Darryl's field knows about certain risk things, matrices, certain things, certain facets that he understands that somebody like me in developmental psychology doesn't know, right? And so there's other things, and you end up being a better prompt generator when you have more knowledge in the field. And it's also a conversation. Like, I feel like people talk about generating prompts. I don't generate prompts. I have a conversation with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I do this, no, like this, now I want to do this, and I have this, and we have a conversation. It's very much an interactive learning process between the two. I think one of the mistakes is to go become a better prompt generator and not have the learning process of thinking and working through and talking with the process. Vygotsky talks about an inner voice in which all people start to talk to themselves in their inner voice when they struggle. And in reality, ChatGPT is an internal voice that we start to talk to about these problems. But I do think everybody, and it's the reductionism of learning theory, right? Everybody wants to learn how to make that one really good prompt to keep it simple. And the realization is, how much time and you spend and interact with these things. Paul, one of the great things I talk about as a background kind of assessment person, I always try to explain, because I teach teachers, right? And they'll have the bottom, which will be a certain percent. So let's say that as a simple argument, there's 5, rows, and the bottom, which means each row is 20%, right? And so the bottom row will be punctuation. And I always say, that's never actually going to be 20%. And they go, what do you mean? I go, because if someone writes a paper and there's a capital letter at the beginning and only one period at the bottom, but every other thing is covered, right? They're still not going to pass it, because the reality is the marker won't let it pass, right? And so that's but you can get it to produce this rubric, but you don't know how to think about the rubric and understanding that in reality, it isn't 20% each. In reality, it's 20, 20, 20. And that bottom one means if it's not legible, it's going to fail. And that's an inherent thing. And that's the difference between developing what they call a vertical rubric, right? Was if it's not, it can't be passable if it doesn't have this. And that doesn't have like segments and rows. It's a different type of rubric. And understanding that rubric versus this rubric, right? And rubric development and all these things. These are, to me, what I find is the nuance that is still going on in interacting with these things. But my argument is it's not any different than it ever was in reality, right? Because writing a rubric like that, right? This is expert, less so, less so, less so. I mean, you used to go on the internet and just find these words, and everyone says the same thing. Like, it's less than this, it's less than that. It's, you know what I mean? And now ChatGPT just takes that and puts it in for you much easier. But
okay. We're winding up, ladies and gentlemen. It's almost 1 o'clock, and I'm winding Robert up. I'm going to give Darryl a final word though, because it is a Darryl session. Anything last minute piece of advice in a sentence or two about these tools, Darryl? Your thoughts?
If you want to find out more, I've just pasted a YouTube channel who's a professor from America who's really into AI, what it's good at, what it's bad at. And it's really quite interesting, Andy Stapleton. I go to his site once a week to see what he's talking about and look what new tools are out there. I think the other thing is you just need to keep on top of the tools. You don't need to know them all, but know what they are. And that's where I find him. And there's another YouTuber that does more broader AI, everything from art to music creation to these type of models as well. So yeah, but
Awesome.
yeah,
So
I don't think it's going to be as big an issue as we think with students. Again, for all the reasons that Robert said, you know, they don't have the full context.
Yeah. So keep an eye on darrylclare.com.au for the inevitable Gen AI page, ladies and gentlemen.
I will, yeah.
Okay, it's 1 o'clock, so we better wind up. I notice a few people have headed out already. I'm going to say thank you on behalf of everybody, Darryl. Thank you so much for that. As always, what I suspect people will do is go back and watch the recording of your session and pause it at various points and go and try those tools and let you know how things go. That's a standard Darryl session, ladies and gentlemen. Is a watch and try it out. Right, the recording's so valuable. Thank you everyone for coming along to the TELCoP. We'll probably have another TELCoP in about 6 weeks. We haven't worked out who that will be yet, but you'll see some messages out on the internet as per usual. But apart from that, thanks everybody, and thanks Darryl, and thanks Robert. And we'll see you all in about 6 weeks or so.
Excellent. Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.